Welcome back. So I'm still reading about Duke Ellington, and I'm back to Terry Teachout's book, Duke, A Life of Duke Ellington. And yes, I did have some intellectual differences with his tone, with how he appeared to see Duke Ellington, but I also appreciate some of the information that he provided. As previously stated, my interest in learning something about Duke Ellington was a researcher's interest when I read Bell Hooks's book and she indicated that he was an egalitarian. I was immediately drawn to figure out, how did his parents raise him? What kind of community input did he get to become an egalitarian if he was? Well, based on what I've read, it seems he might have tried to be an egalitarian among men, but when he was with women, it was a different story. My concern about sharing this is that this is a common thing in which black men, all men, they can get along well with other men, but then they struggle to get along with women. And especially in the black community where we need to lift up ourselves because of oppression, it's unwise to be at odds with half of our population and the half of the population who nurture our children. Let me jump in. I don't drink anymore, Ellington wrote in Music is My Mistress. Quote, I retired undefeated champion about 30 years ago, and now I call myself a retired juicehead. I drank more than anybody ever. While it would have been no small feat for him to go toe-to-toe with Stanley Greer or Otto Hardwick, there's no reason to doubt his word. But he had seen what alcohol could do and was doing to many of his colleagues, as well as to his father. And so he called it quits, renouncing the gladiatorial boozing that he described with nostalgia in his autobiography. From then on, he settled for hot water with lemon peel. On the bandstand, he drank endless Coca-Colas, each one sweetened still further with 4 teaspoons of sugar. Of course, people often replace one addiction with another, especially when they don't try to address the core issues that are driving the addiction. Continuing, when it came to sex, though, he generally preferred to say yes, and it was around this time that he left Mildred Dixon, his wife, and moved in with a brand new companion. Beatrice Ellis, usually known as Evie, was a long-legged Cotton Club, quote, showgirl, whose job was to stand around and look pretty. She was in accordance with the club's policy, light-skinned, so much so that Clark Terry, on first meeting her, quote, didn't know she was colored or white, end quote. Everyone who knew her agreed that she was also very, very pretty, though Mercer, who grew close to Evie in later years, described her as, quote, typical of many attractive black women at the Cotton Club, very intelligent, but not very well educated. The goal for these women was to snare a handsome black band leader, because if they fooled around with the white patrons, the best they could hope to become would be mistresses. I'll comment later about this. Opinions vary on when she met Ellington. According to one report, Joe Glazer, Louis Armstrong's manager, saw her dancing at a Chicago club and brought her to New York at the age of 16. Glazer had a penchant for teenage girls to work at the Cotton Club, so he brought her to work at the Cotton Club. In another, less likely version of the story, it was Ellington who saw her in Chicago and persuaded Glazer to bring her to the Cotton Club. Whatever the truth of the matter, it appears that Mildred got wind of their affair soon after it began. As Ulanoff indicates, quote, Mildred had heard about a girl who was crazy about Duke and for whom Duke seemed to have some affection. Bea Ellis, a beautiful showgirl at the downtown Cotton Club, had indeed spent a lot of time at the place with him. Quote, there's something there, Mildred told Duke one afternoon. I think there is, Duke said. Do you love her? Mildred asked Duke. I think I do, Duke said. All right, Mildred said. You do as you think best. Well, I don't think there's much love lost between those two. Early in 1939, Mildred gave Duke his freedom and Bea Ellis became Mrs. Ellington. We'll hear more about what that Mrs. Ellington means. Ruth and Mercer stayed behind in the Sugar Hill apartment that Ellington had shared with Mildred, and so for a time did Mildred herself. A society column item indicates that she was still living at 381 Edgecombe with Margaret Wetzel, Arthur Wetzel's widow, in 1941. That's 2 years after they left each other. Moreover, Ellington appears to have kept on paying Mildred's bill, albeit circuitously. Paying her bills, that is. In 1945, the trade papers reported that she was managing Tempo Music, the music publishing firm that Ellington had launched 4 years earlier, and she was still there as late as 1950. Whether the job was anything more than a tax-deductible sinecure is not known. Throughout his life, Ellington would use his business enterprises, including Tempo Music, as a way of subsidizing and controlling his family members. But his willingness to support Mildred says something about his continuing loyalty to her, as well as about his guilt at having cut her out of his life so heartlessly. So there might have been some love lost between them, I don't know. The black press linked Evie to Ellington early in their relationship, but in later years he kept her, as he did Mildred, out of the public eye. Though she gave frequent dinner parties at home, the two were rarely seen together elsewhere. He was less discreet in private, sometimes introducing her to friends as Mrs. Ellington, and he even allowed Ulanoff to refer to her in that way in his biography once. But the label on the doorbell to their apartment said, Bea Ellis and Edward K. Ellington. And after 1946, Ellington never spoke of her to reporters, going so far as Mercer claimed as to pay off gossip columnists and place expensive ads in trade publications to prevent their liaison from being mentioned in print. And though he showered Evie with gifts, he refused to marry her, even after Edna died in 1966. So 17 years into that relationship. It was a recipe for trouble, and Evie, whose nickname reportedly stood for evil, stirred up plenty of it once she realized she had misjudged her lover. According to Mercer, she felt very exploited and worried that she wouldn't be taken care of if he died, because he didn't believe in wills. Evie was very much obsessed with the idea of becoming Mrs. Ellington, but somehow he was able to persuade her that if he were to get a divorce from my mother, it would be a very expensive undertaking. Wouldn't she rather see him have more money? She went along with the idea, and that was where she made her mistake. Instead of saying, I'd rather have you and be poor, she said, I'd rather wait for the money. Worse yet, Ellington made no pretense of being loyal to her. One night he showed up late for a gig, then charmed the crowd with the one-liner, ladies and gentlemen. If you had seen her, you would understand. She was stating that he's late because he had a sexual liaison before coming there, and not with Evie. He believed that he had an absolute right to sleep with any woman at any time, and his sexual appetite was so comprehensive that he even bedded unattractive women to whose charms his friends were blind, explaining that, quote, everyone has to dig a little distortion once in a while in order to lead a rounded life, end quote. Of course, this is hard for me to read on many levels, but a white man writing about it, because you have the black buck stereotype, right? From slavery days, the white man made the black man into a breeder that impregnates black women but not care for them, and then the birth of a nation, we see the black man as this horrible rapist that's going around wanting to ravish white women, right? Meanwhile, it was black women who were mainly being raped, and it's by mainly white men, and then black men joined white men. But yeah, it's hard to hear this kind of narrative. But I have to continue. Because he spent so much time on the road, there was no way for Evie to stop his flings, and none of his friends was willing to help her do so. So he did as he liked, and she stayed home and fumed, waiting impatiently for his infrequent visits. Ellington's friends never settled on any explanation of his behavior, about which he was so unapologetic that in 1952 he wrote a piece for Ebony in which he shared with the world his definition of an exciting woman. She's a fuzzy piece of fluff, gratifying to the touch. She sways seductively through your consciousness with the same subtle power with which a train moves through the night. End quote. Mercer, who witnessed many of his most intimate relationships up close, believed him to be a Don Juan who, quote, had a basic contempt for women. He spent so much time celebrating and charming them, but basically hated them, end quote. Don George disagreed, quote, a lot of men who are womanizers don't like women, but Duke was a womanizer who liked them as well as he loved them, end quote. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say that he liked women, but was wary of them. And he warned the photographer, George Parks, so I have to pause here. To be a womanizer is to use and exploit women, right? There's no way you could like somebody and exploit them. There's no way you could like somebody and reduce them to an object and not a subject. Because even if they want you to do it, when I care about people, I am protective towards them. I'd even protect them from the worst parts of me. So yeah, you cannot be a womanizer and like women. Continue. This is the quote that Duke has. I do not wish to disenchant you, my friend, but fair lady's powers lie not in her soft, beautiful arms. It's discreetly concealed midway her upper left thigh and her lower right hip. Love her madly, Friday through Friday if necessary. Respect her. But watch her. She has more ways to destroy you than the Soviet army. And he tells you right here, like, respect her if necessary, right? It's like as if respect is optional. And he reduces a woman to her genitals, right? And this kind of women are my enemy thing. I'll address that later. In 1951, Ellington recorded a monologue called Pretty and the Wolf, in which he tells the tale of a pretty little girl, a little country but pretty, who comes to the big city where she meets a smooth, handsome, successful, cool fellow who promises to help her, quote, get somewhere. Their purpose is to get her into bed. It is the girl who does the bedding, and she ends up leading her hapless victim around by the nose. That, one suspects, was Duke Ellington's notion of love and marriage. You grow up, you find out that the girls want to do it, have sex more than you do, he said in 1964. They're the pursuers, they're the huntresses. In Man with Four Sides, written around the same time as Pretty and the Wolf, one of the characters says, quote, women who cry and women who laugh, they all want all. Nobody settles for half. End quote. The truth was that, like so many other great artists, Ellington was an opportunist who saw other people in terms of what they could do for him. His detachment, George believed, was complete. Quote, Duke's only concern was getting the next 8 bars straight in his head. He was totally involved in his craft and used people to their own good as fuel for his music. He didn't want a role that would give him permanency in anyone's life. He didn't want anyone to have permanency in his own life. End quote. Least of all did he wish to give his lovers even half of himself. And Evie, who must have thought herself to be the exception, was shocked to learn otherwise. So let's try to break it down because I have time right now. So, of course, in the context of entertainers, that's different from our regular context because often women are deliberately, as the book tells you, they're going to find someone, they're going hunting there, they're wishing to attach to someone with talent, power, prestige. This is their thing. And that is the micro view. But the macro view that we have to see is that this is a part of the patriarchal model that white supremacy is teaching you. It's a woman can only have power, and we had it also in Africa. I must admit, patriarchy is all over it. Women are only allowed to have power when they're attached to men. So you create this terrible cycle where women have transactional relationship with men because this is their only way. As they said about Evie, she had no education. Her only job was to use her looks and also use her body. The solution to the problem is making women equal, having equal opportunity to find their own way. And it's also for women to not accept the materialism of the world, right? Because could she have done something other than be a showgirl? Maybe she could have had some other talent that she would be satisfied with just what she had. She could have been a school teacher. I don't know. I'm just making things up at this point. So in all things, it's always to. So he was feeling resentful towards these women, not seeing that it's fine for him when his power gains him access to their bodies, but he's mad when they use their bodies as a transactional tool. So yeah, it's a complicated thing that we always have to be thinking about life on many levels and fixing things on many levels and not carry on petty resentments towards each other when the structure is what's wrong. But tell me what you think. Thanks so much for listening.